Yeah, the first construct which I would like to cover here is displaying a message box alert. Just a simple message box, probably with a OK button, right? So, or with a OK and cancel kind of button, some kind of a message box like that. So, we'll create it from now onwards. Whatever we do, I am not doing it as a personal.xlsb. I'll create it as a part of the local itself. See, and another good thing about this is now the moment I say I don't want this as a part of personal.xls, I want it local. All you do is copy this code, create a module in local, paste it there. Now automatically it will go as a part of the personal macro workbook. So, or if you have written one code as a part of the local, this workbook, and you want to take it as a part of the personal macro workbook, want to use it for almost all the files, you want to use that particular data or particular code. What you can very well do is you can copy it and save it as a part of the personal macro workbook. So both things can happen. So that's where you don't need to really bother about, right, whether I have written it, whether I have recorded it as a part of the personal macro workbook, or if the macro is there at some place, you can very well play around in terms of putting it wherever you want. For that, you just need to get into this VBA editor and then paste it as per its position. Now, okay, now I want to create one local code here. So I'll come to this insert in the VBA editor where you will have module. So generally the most of the times as a application user, we'll either create modules or we'll create user forms. User form is more like a UI, text box, drop downs, that kind of stuff, like a proper form, user form. You fill the form and click say submit, it updates somewhere. That is what is a user form. Module is a place where we write the code. Class modules are more slightly technical and stuff. So they are more of technicians or technical guys. When he works directly on the collections and groups of objects, they'll use it. But generally from a business user standpoint or an application user standpoint, we'll either create the modules or the user form. We'll do both of them. Okay, once I let's say create a module. Now you see a new module came up here, module 1, and a blank space has come up here. This is where I have to actually write my piece of code. Every piece of code in VBA, there are two types of pieces of code. One is called as a function. The other is called as a subroutine, which is denoted with sub. The difference between the two is sub is more of an action. Like whatever we have been doing, sort, filter, there is no output out of that. So it's not a formula. Whenever we think of a formula, I give this as input, there is some calculation that happens and some output comes out. So whenever our intention is to create a formula, we'll call them as functions. Whenever our job is to do a set of tasks, sort, format, display these counts, using the existing things itself. It's not new formula we are creating. We'll denote that with a sub. Sub is more like a set of tasks. Function is more like a formula which takes this as input. You remember when we say sum, it takes some input, it adds them and gives an output for us. Wherever there is an input and an output mechanism in a cell, we call it as a formula and we denote it with a function here in VBA. Wherever it's only a set of tasks to be done, where there is no output coming out, right, and no specific inputs and no output coming out, it's a set of tasks which uses existing Excel formulas or existing Excel functions itself doing as tasks, we call it as sub. Sorts, filters, or even existing formulas of Excel. existing formulas of Excel also, like we did that sum, count and all, they are all taken as a part of subs itself. But when we create a new formula, right, we create a new formula which takes ABC as input and gives something as output. So, so simply put, anything to do with our own formulas, if we have to write our own formula, not use existing formulas. If we have to write our own formula means it takes some inputs, gives as an output, like find the sum of top 10 numbers in a data. Find the sum of top 10 runs scored. Right? So I want the sum of top 10. So it should take something as input. Out of that, do some calculation, and in a single cell, give me that this is the output. This is the sum of the top 10. So that there I use some existing formulas or whatever, but for me, the output is the formula. The output comes, which is the addition of 10 numbers. Right? So that is what I treat it as a function. But rest all I treat it as subs. So if it, as long as it is not a formula, it's a set of tasks, I write them as subs. Most of the time we write subs only. Unless we are introducing a new formula of our own. If we are introducing some new formula of our own, we write it as a function. Otherwise, we write them as subs itself. Sub is like a subroutine or a sub procedure. People call it through various names. But the VBA construct is simple sub. So even if you receive whatever the recorded one, you see it has written with a sub country performance. The name we have given it as country performance, but it has put a sub before it, and towards the end it has written as end sub. So whatever is written inside that sub and end sub is actually that macro. So every macro is actually written inside that sub and end sub. So when I write a new macro, I'll again write a new sub. It's like new sub. So every macro is written inside a sub. Right? Only if it is a formula, instead of sub, I'll write it as function. Function and end function. Whereas if I am writing it as sub and end sub, it's only a set of tasks. It does not need to result in some output. It just executes some tasks. Okay, when it is more of execute some tasks, we'll write it as sub. When it is more of give me an answer, we write it as a function. When you ask some question, if you say give me an answer to this, do a calculation and give me some output, we'll write it as function. Do these set of tasks. Then it is more of a sub. Okay, now we'll again come back. So I'll write one sub which will simply display a message box to me. Hello world. A very basic program. Just says hello. Okay. So I'll say a simple sub. For this sub, I have to give some name. Let's say hello world. Just do an enter. It itself will write the construct. Sub, and after that name, it will put some open bracket and a close bracket, and it will do end sub. Whatever we write inside this is actually a macro. So instead of doing a record macro and all, even if we write it as sub and end sub, so the hello world will become one macro for us. Right? In our macros list, we'll see a macro called hello world. Because we are writing it in the local, in this database, or in this worksheet. It's not in the personal macro workbook. In this workbook we are writing it. So it will not show the name of the file as personal macro.xlsb. It will only show it as hello world. That's a macro in the local. We'll see in our macros list. This macro will be there. Once we save this, we'll see this macro also in our list. I'll put a simple, another construct which I am using here is msgbox, which is nothing but message box. Message box is like our alert. In the message box, so it gives some hints also, right? So it is saying message box. First thing you have to give it as a prompt. What do you want as a part of the message box? So here I'll display, let's say, hello world. The first step. That's it. Over. So it will display a message box to me saying hello world. Let me save this. Whenever I have a local macro, right? Whenever I have a local macro, the Excel file cannot be saved as .xls or .xlsx. It has to be saved as .xlsm, macro enabled workbook. You just say Control S to this, you will get this message. To save the file, so this macro cannot be saved in macrofee workbook. To save the file with these features, click no and choose as a macro enabled file. If you click on S, the macro will be lost. So you click no, save the file as macro enabled. It's not .xls file, xlsx file. You save it as this one, Excel macro enabled workbook. So it will be saved as .xlsm. Only then a local macro will work. If it is a personal macro workbook, no issues. But if you are writing something as a part of the local workbook, any macro as a part of the local workbook, if that has to work, you have to save it mandatorily, that Excel file, you have to save it as .xlsm. Okay, so let me save this as .xlsm. The way you see the difference in that file also is, you go to that file, you will see with this kind of an exclamatory mark on the Excel file, which is said that this file has macros in it, right? So this is the normal file, and this is the file